Well, it's a subject about which people have very strong opinions and views these days. I have a good friend in the Philippines who's just coming out with a book. He's a very accomplished leader in the Philippines, very respected, been a community organizer for many, many years, and he's coming up with a very, very strong and negative book because of the impact on employment. The Philippines is one of those countries, India is another, where many service jobs have been outsourced. So you're on the phone with somebody, and it's very common now that they'll either be in India or the Philippines. And of course, artificial intelligence is going to make it more and more possible for machines to do the service jobs. And so people are really worried about massive levels of unemployment. For me, I've been more interested in a long time on the, you might say, the cultural, as opposed to just the social and economic effects of artificial intelligence. I think part because we can see those more directly. I think the social and economic impacts are very hard to see. They're very complex. And no doubt they can be really significant and significantly problematic. But the cultural effects are in many ways more self-evident. You know, you sit down at a table at dinner and everybody pulls out their gadget. The way we collect massive amounts of data in order to sell things. Perhaps the most tangible, problematic example I've seen lately is a book that was just published by an old friend, someone we'd worked with for many years. He's the only person in the United States who ever served as both the director of the CIA and the NSA. We worked together with him. His name is Michael Hayden. He's a retired general in the Air Force. We worked together with him when he was at the National Security Agency. And he was trying to build a more collaborative culture within NSA. And then he later became director of the CIA. And he's now written this book where the title of the book is about the confusions today in national intelligence. Is there such a thing as national intelligence in an era of lies? That's the subtitle. So this is the quite paradoxical cultural effects of artificial intelligence. And we all thought everybody would be more connected and we'd have greater intelligence because we're more connected. But we find out that, in fact, because of the way businesses in this industry operate, that it's not that at all. You get whatever news you want to get. And he tells a very poignant story in the middle of the book. He says, I come from Pittsburgh. Most of his family's in Pittsburgh. And he said, probably vast majority of my family, my extended family, are supporters of Trump. And they're really Republicans. They're, you know, as has happened in a lot of our politics, they've drifted more and more to being, you might say, traditionally you would call it extreme right-wing views, but it's not even extreme anymore. It's just, you know, another big camp. But the story he tells is this. He said, I went around and had a lot of meetings with a lot of different people, and I tried to, in working on the book, spend just as much time with people who were, quote, liberal versus conservative. Now these terms don't even have much meaning, but, you know, people particularly who are big supporters of the current administration. And he said, so I'm listening to a 2-hour conversation. People are telling me all their views. And finally, at the end, I say, well, maybe now I can ask a question. He said, here's the question I asked. I said, do you really believe that Obama bugged Trump's headquarters? Because that's one of the kind of views that a lot of people who believe that there was a lot of shenanigans with the election. That Trump's corporate headquarters, which was also his campaign headquarters in New York, was bugged. And then he said, I actually know something about this field, having been the head of NSA and CIA. He said, that building is impossible to bug because of the particulars of the building. You could never do it. And he said, you really believe? And they said, oh, yes, we all know it. He said, you all know it? He said, oh, yes, we all know that Trump headquarters was bugged by Obama. And he said, where do you get your news? And he said, they all said the same thing, Facebook. And he said, there is a big problem. Because those businesses, and I think this is an area that really should be regulated, you know, the ability of the for-profit businesses to be on news sites, because, you know, they all use the same algorithms. They have one fundamental orientation in their business, to maximize attention. So you get all those things because they know how addictive it is to see what you want to see. And they all use the same algorithms. You know, if you're interested, you get more of it. If you're not interested, you don't get it anymore. And that's why his subtitle of his book, Can There Be Something Called National Intelligence in an Era of Lies? Because this echo chamber, where you just get more and more of what you want, is become the very interesting consequence of artificial intelligence. So the notion, and he had a beautiful way of framing his whole talk. He said, you know, our university system, our national intelligence systems, most of our core systems of the modern era are kind of came from the Enlightenment view. That while we could never really understand reality totally, there's no truth with a capital T, the more we are good at testing and trying out different ideas, our whole scientific establishment rests on this Enlightenment idea, we get closer and closer to the truth. He said, that was always my view being in the intelligence community. We knew we'd get this wrong or this wrong, but over time we get closer. He said, today that's no longer an operating principle. He said, there's no such thing as an operating definition of truth. And then he said something that was really quite harrowing. He said, I've considered that my kind of guiding principle in my whole life in the military and then military national intelligence, that we get closer and closer to truth. And I've always felt I was kind of dedicated to that process. He said, now I become increasingly radical. I become the radical because I think there is something as getting close to the truth. Now, this is a very strange world. And it's the world that's being created by AI. So I'm saying the cultural impacts of AI are much easier to see. There was a very interesting article in the New York Times about a week or two ago about how the Silicon Valley executives all put their kids in schools that do not allow gadgets. They don't want their kids in schools with gadgets because they know how addictive they are. And they know how they could really affect the development of young children. So there's a consequence of AI that's very scary. And it's the, quote, post-truth world. It's a cultural consequence. And it's not really about the technology, of course. It's how the technology is used and the business models of the small number of extraordinarily powerful organizations that sit at the heart of this AI revolution. And it's right back to the rich and poor. You know, the number of people in the world who own as much as half, the poorest half of the world, keeps going down and down and down, and now it's down to about 7 individuals have enough private wealth, as much private wealth as the poorest half of the world. And not surprisingly, they're now all in the AI world, whether it's telecommunications or Facebook. So there's a very bizarre cultural dynamic occurring, where on the one hand, the rich get richer and the poor get poorer. On the other hand, we get further and further away from any notion of reality other than if I say it, it's real. And if I'm interested in it, it's what I call the news. Mike said, and he's a very sober guy, he's a lifelong Republican. You know, he's appointed originally by the first Bush president to be the head of NSA, and then by George W. Bush to be the head of CIA. This is not a crazy liberal guy. He's a 4-star retired general who spent his life on national intelligence, but there's a different dynamic at play now. It's not the classic liberal versus conservative. It's the post-truth world, and it's being created by artificial intelligence. Sooner or later, you have to believe that there's a larger reality that will come into play. You know, it isn't true because I say it's true only. But that's what's governing our politics today. So it's the cultural impacts of AI are very dramatic. The economic and social are probably still coming, but it's very problematic.